When we think about vegetarian eating lifestyle, one thing that's beneficial is we want to try to focus on variety. So if you are choosing to eat vegetarian, that type diet, be sure you include a nice amount of variety. Choose lower fat, because if all we do is choose cheese and cookies, we aren't eating meat, but we're not getting a healthy diet. So choose low fat options and high fiber protein options, like beans would be a good choice, nuts or nut butters. You can use soy products if you choose to use milk and eggs. Fruits and vegetables should be a big part of your diet. Each meal may be 2 servings of whole grains. So the recipe we use tonight is a really good idea for the whole grains part of that. And then low-fat dairy. So it gives you a little bit of a foundation if you're choosing a vegetarian diet or you want to have a meatless meal. It gives you a little foundation for what you would want to include in that. When we think about the Heart Association diet recommendations, there's different things that we are looking for as far as taking care of our heart with the food choices we make. One would be include a lot of fruits and vegetables. And eat the rainbow. You'll hear us say that a lot, but a lot of color. You want to have vegetables and fruits that just give you a lot of different colors. Those different foods have different nutrients in them. Low-fat dairy, 2 or 3 servings a day. Choose whole grains. At least half your grains should be whole. Include the whole grains include the entire grain. So it's not that you're losing those beneficial nutrients as they process the grain. The bulgur is a whole grain, and we'll talk more about that later. But the whole grains can be a really good source of B vitamins, folate, iron, manganese, selenium. There's different things that we won't get as much in other foods. They also can give us more potassium, which is something that's missing and it isn't as high in our diets as what we should have. How many times a week should we have fish? Twice. Thank you. So include that, the poultry and nuts. So just get a variety. You want to have less of the sodium and less added sugar. And again, the recipe we use tonight will help you do that. So we're going to get started. We have the olive oil, and we'll add, it's about a cup of chopped onion, and we're going to cook that for maybe about 10 minutes till it can brown. So we'll let that start to cook, and while that does that, I'm going to get the other ingredients ready. Some of the things that we'll need as we make the bulgur pilaf. The one thing we're going to do is the fresh ginger. Have any of you used fresh ginger before? I'm sure some of you have. You just want to take, and I'm sorry you can't see, but trim the end, and you want to take a paring knife and just peel it. When I do these cooking demonstrations, I've made the disclaimer before. I'm a dietitian, I'm not a chef. I like to eat healthy foods and I enjoy cooking. But just the disclaimer, I'm sure there's things that maybe some of you have learned or you've been told that's a little different. But these are just ways that I've found work at home. So we're going to take the outer shell, the skin off of this ginger. I bought this at Muster's, and I purchased it. The price was by the pound. So I didn't want to buy a lot of it because I didn't want to waste it. It was a little bit, some of these herbs, when I went to buy them this time, were a little expensive. And that's why when we're doing this recipe, you'll see some things I'm using are the dried herbs instead of the fresh. And I included that in the recipe because often what I find people will say when I'm seeing them for our diet is, well, it's so expensive to eat well. And we can use a lot of the herbs, but you can use the dried instead of fresh if it just seems a little bit prohibitive with price. So we have the outer shell peeled off. We're just going to grate this. We need about 2 tablespoons for the recipe. You can use the dried ginger as well, but sometimes it's just nice to use the fresh. This is like how many like to multitask? If I seem a little distracted, it's like, ah. Last night when I made this, I used a grater that was a little larger, and that worked fine. So either you could use the larger size grater or the smaller. I thought it may be nice not to have such large pieces. That's why I'm using the smaller grater. Okay, so we have about 2 teaspoons of ginger here. And I'll let this to the side for later. And then the next thing we want to do is the garlic. And all we'll do with that is just the 1 garlic clove. And we'll take the outer peel off of that. Between the gloves and the smallness of this is a... Do you all like to use fresh garlic, or do you use the garlic powder at home? Or some of both? Some of both. The fresh is nice. Now sometimes when you have bulgur pilaf, you may have more garlic than what we have in this. I didn't want to make it too strong because I wanted you to enjoy it. Sometimes if things get too flavorful, it's hard. I have people different times, it's too garlicky, and I didn't want that to happen for this dish for you. So we'll just chop this in small pieces, and then that's ready for us to add to the onion. When I've made this, I enjoy a little more texture in food. So instead of chopping the carrot fine, I like to keep it in slices or nice sized pieces so that it just gives a little bit more texture. And you'll see that when you taste it. You may choose to have it be chopped, and that's fine. Everyone has different preferences, but it's just nice to have it have a little bit more texture. See, we're finding a way to get all these vegetables with the bulgur, with the pilaf, which is a nice advantage too. I found the vegetable broth. I chose a brand that wasn't as high in sodium as some are. Some of the broths, when you're buying them, they have a lot of sodium in them. And this has some, but it was lower than some of the other brands without being totally low sodium. If you're choosing to use this recipe so that you have a meatless meal, not so much that you want to have a vegetarian diet, you could use chicken broth in this as well, and that would be a fine substitute. So we have the onion is ready. Now we're going to add the garlic. And we'll saute that just for a minute. And then the next thing we're going to add is the 1.5 cups of bulgur. Bulgur is wheat. Have you used wheat berries before? Do you know what they look like, the whole kernel of wheat? The wheat berries are not processed, but what they've done with the bulgur is they have cooked it, boiled it, and then they'll dry it and break it into pieces. And it's called parboiled. So it doesn't take that long to cook, which is really nice. If you would make the whole kernels of wheat, the wheat berries, it would take about an hour to cook it. They have a little bit more, they hold their texture and they're good, but this is a little easier to make. It doesn't take very long to cook it. So we'll stir that around and coat it with the oil. And then we're going to add the turmeric, the cumin, and then we'll add the broth. It's 1/2 teaspoon of the cumin and 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric. Turmeric adds a really nice yellow color to it. and just it makes it really pretty. I just think this dish that's on the right, which is I did last night, it's just such an attractive. It's just a nice looking dish to enjoy. So we added that. Now we're going to add the 2 cups of vegetable broth. And I know it's 2 cups because it's a quart and I took 2 cups out last night and I thought, oh, that makes it easy. So we have that. We're going to bring that to a boil. We're going to add our carrots. What's nice about this dish that we have in these recipes is you can make the bulgur pilaf and then save some of it because it does, this was one recipe. So if you're cooking for 1 or 2 or 3 people, you won't eat all of this at one meal. You can use about half of that recipe then the next day and make the tabbouleh. So it makes it easier. You make one dish and then you get other healthy meals from the same dish and you're not cooking all over again. It's something nice you can take. You could either heat this up for lunch or you could add maybe if you would want to have a piece of grilled salmon, this would be a nice side to add to it if you just wanted to heat it up. Or if you had the tabbouleh salad, it would be nice to add with some, if it's chicken or salmon or another type of fish, or just having it as part of a vegetarian meal, meatless meal. Either way. But if we can find a way to make all this easier, we're much more likely to do it. So now we're going to add the ginger to this. And we also want to add the dill. I've chosen to use the dried dill, and to be honest, I couldn't find it in the store, and I wasn't in the mood to pay a large amount of money either. So, does anybody else get stubborn like that? And I thought, you know what, the dried dill it'll be good. In the summer, it's really nice. So a teaspoon of dill. So we did the 2 teaspoons of the ground ginger, the fresh ground ginger. I made it before with the dried ginger. It was fine. And then the dried dill. Summertime, it's really nice to use some of these herbs if you have them in your garden or they're a little more plentiful in the markets. You could use more fresh herbs. The other thing you can do, like the parsley that I have here to the side, I purchased a bunch of parsley that you can easily use what you would want fresh and then wash the remainder, and while it's still fresh, chop it and freeze it in a freezer bag. And instead of wasting it, you have it then that you can use for the next couple weeks. It's just a nice way to have those fresh herbs that you can use in cooking, and it's not wasteful. So we have this that is starting to boil. We want to add a half teaspoon of coarse salt yet. And to medium-low, and let that simmer. And we're ready to work on the salad. So this was last night, and it's a recipe of the bulgur pilaf that's been chilled. What we'll do now is add more vegetables to it. And we want to peel the cucumber. And I want to check how large the seeds are. I know the recipe says to seed it, but if the seeds aren't real large, I think I'm just going to chop it. I'm going to cut it in lengthwise in strips and then slice it. And then we have the tomato. The history of the bulgur pilaf and the tabbouleh, it's a Middle Eastern dish, and normally the tabbouleh is eaten cold, and it will be made with the wheat grains and herbs and vegetables. So it really is naturally a very healthy food. You'll find lots of different recipes. If you search on the internet or you have ideas for different ways of making things, there's lots of ways to make it. The bulgur, you don't always have to make it with all these spices. You could make it a little more plain if you'd want to do that. Have you tried meatless meals? Pizza! Well, pizza's meatless. What could you do to pizza to make it a little healthier? Add more vegetables. Instead of, please, well, the meat lover's pizza, I think we all know, would not be meatless. But that it didn't have so much cheese added and have more vegetables. You can get pizza sometimes that has the tomatoes and maybe like a feta cheese and a lot of tomato and fresh basil. There's ways to have pizza that it can be very good and much healthier. Farro, and quinoa is a good idea. Have most of you used quinoa? That's nice to use. That can be I'll use that sometimes instead of rice, like if I have a stir fry but the quinoa has a nice amount of protein. So does by the calorie value, the quinoa will have about the same amount of protein as the bulgur will. Any other questions? You can use like a whole grain pasta. If you wanted to find instead of using the white pasta, substitute with the whole wheat type of pasta, you can do that. And even if some of them aren't 100% whole grain, but if you can get one that's even like a 51% whole wheat compared to plain white pasta, it's a way to increase the amount of whole grains in your diet. What we want to do now is we're going to add some lemon juice and parsley to the bulgur pilaf. And we're about ready to sample. Any other questions? Okay, this is done. It's absorbed the liquid. So we'll add the parsley. Can you smell it? Does it smell good? Nope. And I always like to use fresh lemon juice instead of a bottled. It's just one of those. So we'll do 3 tablespoons. You can make this without the lemon juice. What I find is it really, the second, after that lemon juice can be absorbed the next day, you don't taste it quite as much. And it does change the flavor a little bit, but it adds a nice taste. Without it, it's a little bland, but with it, it'll be a different flavor than what you might be accustomed to. Okay, so we're ready to serve that. We're going to stir this. We added the mint and the cucumber and the tomato. But it's kind of like at one time we can have 2 very healthy items for a meal. Well, I hope you enjoy. And thank you so much for joining us. I'd be happy to answer any questions or if you have any other comments.